This is my Transcendant Theory of Unity. There will be a short introduction before we come to the very core thesis. While the science of physics has great meaning to mankind, in the end it won't be able to provide the answers to the big whys of the universe. Quantum electrodynamics already proved that observation alone affects reality. Observer and observed are one. Wherever and for how long we search for more, we'll always find more. More of something smaller or something larger. However, although the science of physics won't provide answers, it will provide us with the ability of asking better questions. Questions that give us the chance to increase our wisdom instead of our knowledge. One of the first things this wisdom will reveal is that knowing much without being able to use this knowledge for life is useless, while knowing little but being able to apply it to life brings what we all strive for: enlightenment. Enlightenment is just a word, but it refers to the experience of understanding everything, the revelation of all questions. Many people experienced it, maybe only for split seconds. All the world's religions are rooted in a prophet who spoke from enlightenment. Something preserved to spiritual, credulous people? Not quite. It is true that you can awaken to enlightenment by being purely scientific. The experience of scientifically understanding the eternal now equals the experience of spiritual oneness. You could say enlightenment is logical. Thesis number 1. The now takes time to communicate itself, and it does so at the speed of light, you could say. What does this mean? Look at this drop of water. First, the drop is falling and the water is still. Then the drop hits and starts creating ripples in the water. The ripples change and are creating themselves anew constantly. This change works its way from one molecule of water to the next, and thus communicates itself from the center to the outside. With the now, it's the very same story. The now is a word for describing all creation or change that happens now. The time it takes the now to communicate itself to another location can be called the now delay. So for example, the time it takes to communicate change from the center to the outside. We might also call it the creation delay. Let's go deeper by imagining two distant locations. Each location has a local now for itself, and they're absolutely contemporary, but only if seen separate from each other. An individual local now is never able to experience this contemporariness, since the distant local now needs time to travel through space. For example, once the distant local now from the Mars hits us at Earth, it is of course not the contemporary now of Mars anymore, but a now that is delayed by the time it required to reach us. In a way, the now delay and the speed of light are interwoven with each other. However, the now, or change, would still update itself even without light, while light wouldn't be able to traverse space without change. There's a very easy way to prove this thesis, and it was quite some time ago. It was discovered by Richard Feynman in his work Quantum Electrodynamics. And he says that light can travel every possible path to reach a specific point in space. Here an example of light from the sun on its way to Earth. Then something, you might say, irritating happens. In the moment of observation, it suddenly seems that the light went straight. However, the light didn't necessarily move straight at all, which means that it traveled a much longer distance and still made it at the speed of light in time. So basically it traveled much faster. The fundamental difference to other paradigms is that the speed of light is just a misperception of the now delay and not a phenomenon in itself anymore. Thesis number 2. Gravity is caused by a space warp. The effects we attribute to gravity are truly caused by a space warp, not by unidentified particles like dark matter or mass. This means that gravity is just a word to describe phenomena of our world, but it really doesn't exist at all. Following the same thought, mass, speaking the weight of matter, is an illusion created by space warp too. Most other paradigms say that mass creates gravity and gravity creates space warp, which is the other way around. Thesis number 3. Space can be warped without matter. We make the following observations. Mass itself is not warping space, but still, space is warped. So as a deduction, we have to suppose that space can be warped without matter. Possibly, even the space inside your room you're sitting in right now is warped, although you couldn't perceive it as that. And thinking about it from this perspective, what makes us so sure that our space is flat? Thesis number 4. Space warp is a spatial dimension. This conclusion is very logical, but not easy to understand. Let's look at our 3 dimensions. Then the ability of space to be warped is another dimension, which sits perpendicular to our 3 dimensions, similar to time, which we'll discuss in a minute. So space warp is an inwardness of space, as a warp into all directions and into itself. And every point in space has the ability to be inward or outward in infinite ways, like a floating balloon can be at every height of our 3 dimensions. An interesting deduction from this is that you can explain our perception of expanding space. If we assume that the distance from Earth to a far away galaxy being a 3D space plus space warp distance, let's call it 4D distance, then this 4D distance stays the same, while a change in the inwardness of space creates the perception of our expanding 3D space. Remember that this is a 2D model of a 4D process. Thesis number 5. The inwardness of space is affected by creation. In other words, we move through the dimension of space warp by change. And this is a big one. First, we have to get clear on the word creation, which expresses every type of change that is observed by consciousness. Here's an example. This is a 3x3 array of infinitely small points in space. And each point in space can change in infinite ways, which is pictured by the surrounding border. But at the same time, each point in space knows the contents of all other points in space, which is pictured by the small 3x3 array inside. So let's say the top left point changes to blue, then step by step it communicates this change to the surrounding points. The same happens if 2 points change at the same time, then they communicate themselves simultaneously to all other points. On a bigger scale, let's imagine we're sitting in an infinitely small vantage point between Earth, Moon and Mars. It is said that the smallest distance possible is the Planck length. So you could also assume to sit in a Planck length size vantage point. Every point in space constantly communicates itself and sends out now waves. In this case, we'll look at the now waves of surrounding planets. On the way from their source to us, every infinitely small point is updated like ripples in the water. Then, at one point, all the now waves from the planets arrive at our vantage point simultaneously, which means that this infinitely small point was updated from 3 sources at once. Now, so far we only looked at the communication of creation at 0 speed. We all know from the theory of relativity that we can travel at the speed of light. Well, first we need to say that we can travel at the speed of now. But why is that? Approaching the speed of light, mass of an object increases. This mass is the illusion created by space warp, and space warp is the inwardness of space. So approaching the speed of now, the inwardness of space increases. So what happens if that which is creating the now wave approaches the speed of its own communication? In other words, What happens if we approach the speed of light? Well, it causes a Doppler effect of creation, like a siren of a fire truck. In a thought experiment of a rocket traveling at the speed of now, it sends out a now wave, but constantly creates new now waves, which are adding to the original ones. It's like creating a different truth or reality. In the moment of the now reaching a distant observer, it appears like the rocket is in every point simultaneously. Our conclusion is that more creation equals more space warp equals more mass. We also learned that space warp is different from where you look. Maybe it's helpful to use our 3x3 array to understand the example with the rocket. So the top left point turns blue and communicates that change, but it also travels at the speed of light through our 3x3 array. But what happens is that with each step we create another truth in which all now waves exist simultaneously, and basically there are 3 versions of reality in each point. Thesis number 6. Time is all higher dimensions. This thesis is not fundamentally new and was already described in books about 100 years old. Basically, time is an illusion created by motion through higher dimensional space. In a way, one could say that everything in the past and everything in the future already exists in higher dimensions. The negative aspect about this explanation is that it uses time, the past and the future, according to our human understanding of it. So seeing it this way might block further understanding. The only way to really understand time as higher dimensional space is by experiencing the eternal now. Then it becomes clear that every possibility of the past and every possibility of the future already exists in the now. Thesis number 7. Space has no dimension. No matter of how many dimensions might exist, space has the capability of containing all dimensions there might be. Space is infinite and contains everything that is. This is why we can say that space is undimensional, it has no dimension. Thesis 8. Everything is one. Everything is one, and this oneness is watching itself. This conclusion might seem like a big jump, but it isn't at all. All is possibilities until observed. Everything we are unconscious of is possibilities. This doesn't mean that we ourselves create what we observe. A tree, for example, has its own consciousness and grows himself alone. For him, we, sitting in front of our screens, are possibilities. Only when our fields of consciousness merge, the possibilities collapse and create. Everything is created by observation. My name is Marcus, and thank you for watching.